24 past 8 o'clock, 101.7 FM, 710 Kilo. If I'm talking fast, it's because we've got lots to cover with Judge Paul Young. I'm going to reread the email just to reset the segment for anybody that joined us. Erin writes, Judge Paul, I am contacting you regarding a crisis that will occur this summer at our Juvenile Detention Center. It is already the smallest in the South for any metropolitan area. It runs at capacity now. In July, we will begin to have jurisdiction over 17-year-olds. Basically, you're getting a lot of new guys dumped on you, and you don't have the space.
Nor the money. From the state makes these laws, Paul. I'm sorry I call you Paul. They make these laws, but then they don't send any money attached with it. Is that a huge problem?
But at the same time, that's not really the problem.
Okay.
The problem is we have always had, at least since I've been on the bench since 1999, we have had the smallest detention center in the South.
Gotcha.
We have to have a larger detention center. We should have a larger one just to handle what we're doing now.
When you tell me,
we make arrangements, we make cuts here and decisions here, and expand our electronic monitor supervision so that we can manage that problem.
When you told me 24, and I've heard that number before, and my reaction is always, wait a second. We only have 24 room for 24 bad guys in Caddo Parish.
Right. Ask the police, ask the sheriff deputies that make the arrests, and see the kids that are turned around and get home practically before they do, because we can't take them in.
Do you have an issue, Paul, with and you probably do, with moving a 17-year-old who may be a hardened criminal into a facility where you may have 13 and 14-year-olds?
Well, that's one reason why the pod system is pretty good, in that we can keep them somewhat separate. And the commission has agreed, even if we don't increase the detention center, to add 3 or 4 extra detention staff for our budget. So
in other words,
what
I was talking about is when you've got a 17-year-old in with a 13-year-old who in a lot of cases, I mean, when I was 13, I was like 3 foot tall and weighed 60 pounds. You do see wisdom in separating those. Okay.
We have to do that. And we do that now, even in our 24-bed facility.
Gotcha.
The $12 million to expand the facility.
Right.
Would it, I mean, does this have to be all the bells and whistles? Can you do like a tent city sort of? I mean, can you do something on the cheap?
Not to kids.
You can't.
Steve Prater, Sheriff
Not
Prater,
allowed?
Not to kids.
Sheriff Prater has talked about, and I guess I don't know all the details, but about how parish prison systems like Bossier Max, whoever it happens to be, Caddo Correctional, they farm out prisoners or trade them or send them to other facilities elsewhere in the state, with our facility being, in your mind, hopefully temporarily small. If we're overcrowded and there are larger facilities in Monroe, Lafayette, et cetera, is the possibility to maybe, okay, kid, we don't have room for you here. We're sending you to Monroe for X amount of time.
They've not been willing to do that because they want the beds for people in their region. In fact, say in Lafayette Lake Charles.
I want you to stop it. So basically what you're telling me is at the other facilities, despite their larger size, they ain't got room either.
Well, they serve a variety of, one serves a region, and so the occasional kid from a very small parish that needs to be detained, that's where they're going to go. But they're not going to serve a metropolitan area like Caddo that has the resources, theoretically at least, to take care of their own business.
Places
and farm that out to
places like
else.
Bossier Parish, where I guess they use Johnny Gray Jones for their juveniles, but that's not really
We do too.
You do too.
That's where we put our kids.
What's Bossier going to deal with when Johnny Gray Jones is full? What are they going to do with these 17-year-olds? Well, Johnny Gray Jones
is for non-secure, more of a group home type situation. It's not for delinquent children primarily. You can put misdemeanor offenders there, like shoplifters and such, that for some reason you need to put them in a place. But it's primarily for ungovernable, runaway type children rather than delinquent.
But a parish like Bossier that doesn't have a juvenile lockup, where do their 17-year-old armed robbers go?
They use Caddo. It's a regional detention center that serves that variety of rural parishes.
So to wrap up, when you go to the commission on the 22nd, what's the plan? What do you hope they'll do? How will all this turn out if in a perfect world?
While we have told them before, we need to make very clear exactly what the problem is, as I've tried to describe today, and present to them what we think should be done, and that is build the 3 pods, adding to our detention center, and funding the annual upkeep for that. Now, no, we're not hopeful, because they are aware of the anti-tax, anti-bigger government, even in the interest of public safety, that's the issue here, is public safety. And yet they recognize that the people are not willing to do that.
So you feel
what
like
we have talked about, and this is important, since it seems to be perhaps a trust issue. Oh, the commission has plenty of money, we don't need to give them any more. The thought has been to create a sort of a blue ribbon commission made up, I would think, primarily of the people that might oppose this extra money for the detention center, to look at the books, open up the books of the Caddo Parish Commission, have the people that might oppose this looking at those books. If they can find the money, by golly, great. And if they can't, then you either choose to fund it or you sacrifice public safety.
Last 30 seconds or so here. July 1st comes, you don't have a new facility. Would you then have to prioritize who stays locked up and who gets released?
Sure, and we do that now, but the dynamics are critical. 17-year-olds are more likely to have a record already, especially if they committed a serious offense or alleged to have committed a serious offense. They know that they are very likely to be removed from the home and placed somewhere. 17-year-olds have a much better ability to live on the street, leave town, than a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old. So their flight risk is much greater. So the likelihood of me having to detain that 17-year-old pre-trial is higher than a 13 or 14-year-old that commits the same offense. That requires 17-year-olds to occupy the bulk of the 24 beds, which means we'll still have some room for the 13 and 14-year-olds that commit serious offenses like armed robberies. But that takes up the 24 beds right there. Any other type of offender that we now would house goes home. The little Johnny that bows up to mother and socks her in the jaw that we would ordinarily keep in detention for a cooling off period, where are we going to put them?